The year is 2006. Chasing Cars by Snow Patrol is playing every time you turn on the radio. The Heroes pilot is all anyone's talking about, and this new video hosting website, YouTube, is taking the internet by storm. It's been 6 entire years since the last entry in the series, Persona 2 Eternal Punishment, and the series developer, Atlus, has been struggling financially for some time now. In fact, the director of the modern Persona games, Katsura Hoshino, has gone on record saying that when development began on Persona 3, they were told it would likely be the studio's last release. Atlus has been well known for decades for making hardcore Japanese role-playing games for a loyal but very niche audience, and at this time, Hoshino recognized that if the company was going to survive, something had to give. This idea of continuing on despite dire situations is fundamentally baked into Persona 3's DNA, and this is evident in just about everything about it. From the story's core message of reckoning with your own mortality and still finding reason to love living despite it, to the completely overhauled gameplay loop revolving around playing out nearly every single day in a calendar year, it's clear that the importance of this project weighed heavy on Hoshino and the team's mind as they developed it. Hoshino has spoken in an interview with J-Wave Radio on how extensively he studied and analyzed everything about Persona 1 and 2, from their settings and themes to gameplay systems and aesthetics, to propose a new direction for the franchise that would appeal to a broader audience, while keeping the essential spirit of what exactly Persona represents intact. Despite there being quite a bit of discourse about how well this shift was executed, both for Persona 3 itself and the games in the series that follow it, I believe Hoshino and the team he led were able to do so. Persona 3 FES is a game that understands exactly the experience it wants to impart upon the player, and nearly every single aspect of it works to deliver on that vision. Every gameplay system, character arc, and stylistic element exists for a reason past that of mechanical necessity, and though the execution of how these all fit together can be clunky at times, a widely released game that's unabashedly sure and even proud of the specific experience it wants to deliver, and makes very few compromises to do so, is not something that comes along very often. Because of this, the experience it does end up delivering is one that both feels out of time and simultaneously of its time. There's frustrating gameplay elements that feel very PS2, as well as the fundamental style and tone tapping into a specific flavor of emo teenage angst that can only really be fully understood by those who lived through it. At the same time, a lot about Persona 3 feels exceptionally ahead of games of its type releasing at the time, and the setting, characters, themes, and even a lot of the gameplay loop feel positively timeless, both conceptually and in execution. There's definitely a reason they kept the calendar and social simulation systems for later entries, as they create a gameplay loop that's rewarding in ways pure dungeon crawling can't be, and feels extremely addicting to execute no matter how many times you go through it. Discussing any one aspect of Persona 3 on its own merits proves difficult, simply because nearly every single thing in it exists to elaborate on some aspect of the narrative and themes. It's an impressive exercise in game design as a vehicle for storytelling, but also makes it difficult to separate things like style, structure, story, and gameplay when examining them critically. This intrinsic interplay between gameplay and story is part of what makes the game work, but also a factor in what makes certain aspects of it so divisive. When every piece of an experience is so intimately intertwined like it is in Persona 3, separating the individual parts can make them seem less well executed than they really are. Before we begin, there's a few things I would like to clarify and expectations I would like to set before diving into talking about the game proper. Because these games can take upwards of 100+ hours to complete a single playthrough of, I am only mostly covering what I consider the most complete versions of the game. I will be focusing most of my discussion on Persona 3 FES for the PlayStation 2, which I played on my backwards compatible PlayStation 3. The FES version of Persona 3 features added content such as a new challenge dungeon, Monad Depths, a new social link for the party member Aegis, new mechanics, rebalanced combat and gameplay, quality of life tweaks across the entire game's runtime, and a sequel campaign to the original game, The Answer, or Episode Aegis as it's referred to as in Japan. Because there is only so much time in the day, and I am only one person making the lunatic decision to cover multiple 100+ hour games. I will unfortunately not be discussing the other two versions of the Persona 3 story that exist, that being Persona 3 Portable and Persona 3 Reload. Persona 3 Portable is an adapted version of Persona 3 FES made for the handheld console, the PlayStation Portable. Since it's on a handheld console that had far less technical capabilities than a home console, P3 Portable does not feature explorable 3D environments outside of dungeons, and lacks any kind of cutscenes like its PS2 equivalent. Therefore, the story plays out more like a visual novel of the era, which definitely alters alters the experience somewhat. To make up for this alteration and what could be considered an ultimate negative for the release, an alternative version of the game's main campaign was added, where you can play as a female version of the main character instead of the original male main character that you play in every other release of the game. This isn't just a simple gender swap though. The female main character, often referred to as FEMC, is characterized entirely different from the male MC in the main campaign, and this alters the story and social simulation aspects of the game quite a bit from the original. FEMC's campaign features a nearly entirely different selection of social links, some of which can alter major parts of the game's story, and huge adjustments to the social links that remain to stay more in line with the major differences between how male MC and FEMC process their emotions, interact with others, and perceive the world around them. Many fans love FEMC and consider the writing and social links in her campaign in P3 Portable to elevate the story past the hardware limitations and even to new heights that surpass the original. That brings us to the recently released remake of Persona 3 FES, Persona 3 Reload. Reload is a from-the-ground-up reimagining of Persona 3's story and gameplay, and features completely remade graphics and stylistic differences in the modern game engine Unreal Engine 4, a total rehaul of the combat system, and heavy alterations to the way dungeon crawling works, minor rewrites to many major story moments, character interactions, and social links in the game, as well as an entirely new voice cast and brand new songs, along with the updated arrangements and performances of the existing songs. All this adds up to a very different experience from the game it's based on, and while I do greatly appreciate Reload's part in bringing a new audience to the game, as well as respecting how important it and FEMC's campaign are to Persona 3's legacy, I am also not strong enough to play 2 additional 70+ hour JRPGs for this video. I clocked, I kid you not, somewhere around 600 hours of these fucking games over the span of 6 months for this video. That's 120 odd hour playthrough of Persona 3 FES, 2 80+ hour playthroughs of Persona 4 Golden, and 2 100+ hour playthroughs of Persona 5 Royal. I spent a total of 3.5 weeks of time playing these games the past 5 months. I'll play P3 Portable, Reload, and The Answer one day, and maybe even make a video about them. But that's not going to be anytime soon. I want to rest. In addition, there will be minor and major spoilers throughout my entire discussion, so please tread with caution if you care about spoilers and haven't played any version of Persona 3 yet. With all that out of the way, I urge you to sit back, relax, and come along with me as we relive our youths and dive headfirst in the world of Persona 3. Persona 3 begins with the Knight the player character, who I will be referring to as MC from now on since the player names him themselves, moves into the dorm of the new school he's transferring to, located in the coastal city of Tatsumi Ports Island. When he arrives at the dorm, an odd boy in pajamas with piercing blue eyes asks him to sign a contract, promising to take full accountability for his actions. But when he questions the other 2 students staying in the dorm, the posh yet sheltered Mitsuru Kirijo and the cute but bristly Yukari Takaba, about him and the contract, they have no idea what he's talking about. The next few days at school play out without much fanfare until one night Yukari shakes MC awake and hands him a gun, before fleeing to the roof to try to escape the monster that's attacking their dorm. There, they're faced with a gruesome beast called a shadow, and as the 2 watch in fear as it slithers towards them, MC hears the boy from the first night tell him to go on, before pointing the gun at his head and pulling the trigger, in what might just be the coolest anime cutscene in the entire series.
Persona.
MC awakens to his persona, a powerful physical manifestation of his soul's fighting spirit, and with its help is able to swiftly kill the shadow. Afterward, the school's chairman, Akutsuki, along with Mitsuru, Yukari, and the only other student staying at the dorm, the stubborn captain of the boxing club, Akihiko Sanada, reveal to the MC that they too have personas, and utilize them as part of their secret school club, the Special Extracurricular Execution Squad, or SEAS. Together, they have been investigating the strange phenomenon known as the Dark Hour, a period of time that occurs late at night when one day passes to the next, where most humans turn to coffins, and these shadows roam the streets, and go on to ask him to fight alongside them as they attempt to uncover the mystery of not only the Dark Hour, but the foreboding labyrinth that replaces their school grounds every night during it, Tartarus. In the following months, MC and Cs continue to progress through Tartarus and uncover the secrets of the Dark Hour, as they recruit new members, including the class clown with the savior complex, Junpei Iori, the intelligent but painfully shy second-year Fuka Yamagishi, a precocious child who lost his mother to a shadow 2 years prior, Ken Amada, a robot girl designed by Mitsuru's father's company that funds Cs and built to kill shadows, Igus, and Koromaru is just a normal-ass dog with a persona. As I mentioned before, Persona 3 is the first game in the series to utilize the calendar system. At the start, you are told that MC has 1 year to make the most of his life, with your heart as your guide. Mechanically, this means that beginning in early April and through the final boss that takes place on January 31st of the next year, the player will control the main character's actions through nearly every day of that year. An average day in Persona 3 consists of 2 distinct time blocks: after school, or daytime if it's a day that school is not taking place, and evening. There are many activities that can be carried out during these time blocks, and by choosing to partake in an activity that takes time, you will consume that block, and after finishing it, move to the next time block in the day, or to the next day entirely. So for example, if I choose to study at the school library in my after-school time block, a short scene of the character doing so will play while time passes, and then you will be placed back in the dorm common room to decide what to do for the evening time block. After doing something in the evening, you go to bed and then wake up the next morning to repeat the process all over again. This creates a very engaging time management function, where the player must decide how to use their time to either level their social stats, progress their relationships with other characters, or go through the game's other half by spending time in the central dungeon, Tartarus. Unlike most JRPGs and even previous games in the series, Persona 3 does not feature multiple dungeons that you fight your way through to completion to further the story before starting the next one, and instead has one extremely large dungeon with over 250 individual randomly generated floors. Spending time in Tartarus consumes your evening time block for the day, but you can generally spend as much time there as you want, as long as you and your party don't become fatigued. Which, despite being the mechanic in this game with the most contention among the fanbase, I have virtually zero opinion on. I guess it's kind of annoying that studying late at night while in a great mood will automatically make you sick. It's kind of cool how the final moments of the game tie into the MC's mood being tired, but as it stands, sorry fatigue warriors, I'll defend a lot of the game's mechanics with my life alongside y'all, but this shit just did not matter for the vast majority of my playthrough, and I think the amount people argue about it is massively disproportionate to how much the mechanic actually adds or takes away from the game as a whole. Anyways, Tartarus is separated into blocks, with environments and enemy types unique to that block, and set floor numbers that feature a boss enemy that you must beat in combat to progress. Upon reaching the top floor of a block, you will be faced with a barrier that you cannot progress through until you fight that month's new moon boss, which will happen on the date of the new moon every month and usually doesn't take place in Tartarus. There are 12 of these new moon bosses that you will fight throughout the game, each representing a certain major arcana of the tarot, and with the events leading up to and directly afterwards usually progressing the story. Tartarus itself is an acquired taste, to say the very least, and one of the reasons this game has a reputation of being a grind-heavy one. There's a teleporter at the entrance to Tartarus that you can use to go to the two-way teleporters you activate on the predetermined boss floors, but there can be anywhere from 5 to 15 floors in between these. There are one-way teleporters randomly dispersed throughout the various floors, and when using them to return to the entrance, your party's health and magic points, called SP in this series, are completely refilled. But if you haven't activated the teleporter on the next boss floor, you lose all progress, and upon going back into Tartarus, must start from a lower floor with a two-way teleporter again. This makes progressing through Tartarus a delicate balancing act, where you must keep a close eye on you and your party's resources, as well as mood, and gauge the reward of continuing to climb the floors towards a boss floor with a two-way teleporter, versus the risk of dying in battle and being forced back to the main menu, to load a previous save, and therefore losing not only your progress through Tartarus, but all the loot and leveling you and your party gained along with it. I admire the attempts made with Tartarus, at least conceptually. The idea of one large dungeon you must attempt to conquer throughout the entire game is a genuinely intriguing one that ties into not only the new calendar system, but also the game's themes and narrative quite well. But man, sometimes the execution almost seems like it wants you to hate this place. This is partly due to some of the things that don't directly relate to the act of being in Tartarus. Most glaring among them, that there's just not much to do at night besides go there. After school and daytime blocks have a large variety of things to do and places to go during them, but evening time blocks severely constrict these options, as the only place besides the dorm you can go is the shopping mall. This means in the evening your choices are to go to the mall to spend time increasing a social stat, or do a rank of the only 2 nighttime social links in the game, or just go to Tartarus. This puts you in a weird loop where you might not need to go to Tartarus, and you don't want or have to do anything else available in the evening either, but you don't want to just waste the evening time block, so you go anyway. This is compounded with the fact that the returns of fighting through Tartarus before a new moon boss, but after you've reached the top barrier of the block, severely diminish as the days go by. By the end of the month, enemies in the currently accessible block don't give enough XP to matter for your current level for pure grinding purposes. And in the first 4 months of the game, there's literally only enough party members available to make up a single 4-member party, so you can't even spend time taking different party comps into Tartarus to keep all your characters equally leveled, like you would later on. Even disregarding all that, the benefits of dungeon crawling just aren't enough to make this one big dungeon that punishes overextension on the player's part work. Item chests very rarely drop anything valuable enough to make searching every floor for all of them worth it. And the special floors with rare chests and strong enemies for farming XP are so rare you can go multiple entire sessions without encountering one. I do really like that the MC is able to equip any weapon available in the game, which adds an element of customization when traversing Tartarus outside of battle, and in turn affects what types of physical damage you deal with the attack command in battle. The lighter weapons like the gloves have fast startup and quick recovery while dealing strike damage in combat, but have very little range in the overworld. Whereas the bow has huge range and deals pierce damage, but if you're too close or miss when initiating combat with an enemy, it's sure to ambush you. It's not exactly the most important thing in the game, but it's a nice touch that can work up to cut up the monotony of dungeon crawling. The FES version of this game tried to remedy these issues regarding lack of meaningful reward in Tartarus by adding a spot at the shrine location you could spend a time block praying to that would activate a random beneficial effect that night, like enemies giving double XP, money gained being greater than usual, or the random special floors appearing more frequently. But even this kinda sucks, simply because you have to give up a valuable daytime block to trigger them in a game that already has a very strict schedule to maintain if you want to see as much of the social simulation portions as possible. Part of the fun and addicting quality of the modern Persona games is the ability to switch back and forth between essentially 2 different game modes, that being the social simulation and the dungeon crawling. When you get tired of singing at the karaoke bar to up your courage stat and befriending the funny French transfer student, you're able to cross over seamlessly into the thrill and excitement of traditional SMT-style dungeon crawling. It's a winning formula that captures your attention and keeps you thoroughly engaged for the over 100 hours these games take to complete. And unfortunately, all these little issues with Tartarus, both inside and out of it, can grind this looping just one more day style of engagement to a halt. I literally stopped playing the game for a few weeks while getting through the summer vacation section, because while school is out, you can't access the school social links, which make up over half of those available in the game, and there is absolutely jack and shit going on in the plot, so I had just so little motivation to boot up just to grind social stats and go to Tartarus over and over again for an entire month of in-game time. That being said, these issues I've described with how the game structures what you can do and when you can do it are very minor in the grand scheme of things, especially when taking into account how this is the first time something like this has been attempted on this scale at Atlas. The following 2 mainline entries in the series do a lot to refine and elaborate on the calendar system and how effectively the 2 modes of gameplay are balanced and integrated with each other. But as far as Persona 3 goes, the debut of such a divine Frankenstein of a game that dares to mash Tokimeki Memorial and Rogue's gameplay together into something that actually mechanically functions, much as well as it does through a lot of the game's runtime, is, to put it simply, lightning in a bottle. It's not just a unique gameplay loop that sets Persona 3 apart from its predecessors, or just about everything else available at the time though, because even though it isn't nearly as overt about how it incorporates and emphasizes its aesthetics as some of the later entries in the series, It definitely does still have the hyper-fashionable and slickly produced flair that the modern games have come to be known for. Despite lacking much in the way of bombastically incorporated diegetic design, the elements of it that do exist are some of the more inspired in the series, with the most prominent example being the battle menu. I've always been someone who's had a somewhat overly enthusiastic interest in clever graphic design, and from the first moment I touched this battle menu as a young teenager, it was immediately cemented as the coolest thing ever. Yeah, the actual implementation leaves a not at all minimal amount of room for player error simpler menu styles wouldn't. And yes, it's kind of tedious to use at first. And yes, lore-wise, evokers are very clearly pistols and not revolvers. But truly, none of that matters to me because the edgelord game, where the characters shoot themselves in the head to summon their personas, boasting a battle menu that resembles and simulates the rotating bullet chamber inside a revolver, is so goddamn badass. Something else I really like about the art direction of this game, credited to Shigenori Sojima, is the slightly anachro-futuristic feel of everything. The Gekkoukan school uniforms feel more like something a fleet of space cadets would wear rather than the required uniform for average school students. The modern architecture of the locations, alongside the glistening, airy daytime lighting and understated, cozy nighttime lighting, feels like that of a contemporary art museum, no matter where you are. And especially the polished to a shine menus and UI that would feel right at home on the screen of a bright white map book of the era. All these elements and more work to create the feeling of living in a time barely outside of the near future you can imagine in your mind. A man-made island city that sits on the cutting edge of all things chic and stylish. A modern utopia just out of reach. This contrasted with the grungy and hostile atmosphere that emanates from any scene that takes place during the dark hour, comes together to create a very distinct aesthetic that communicates a teenager's concept of the dreamy, ambient uncertainty of the far-off future of 2009, and the more cynical and mature outlook the adult characters that created the dark hour want. As much as the actual graphical fidelity might look dated now, I do feel comfortable saying FES is still among the best looking games in the PlayStation 2's library. Only really outclassed by games that either came after it or ones that are above and beyond outstanding graphically. While the character models and animations are really well done for the era, they are still significantly limited in their ability to express a lot of the drama of the writing, which is why the visual novel style character portraits above the dialogue boxes work so well to tie the act of reading and experiencing any given scene together. I absolutely adore the art style of these character portraits, no matter how off they can look sometimes. The posing, expressions, and line work just have so much charm and personality that works to really endear you to these characters, and furthermore, the occasional inconsistencies or wonkiness of a lot of these portraits works well to capture an intent that exists among most of the character concepts in writing, being that of exploration into what authenticity exists buried beneath exaggerated anime tropes. These humanist deconstructions of commonly recognized archetypes, familiar to just about everyone who's consumed any amount of stories set in high school, remains one of the strongest aspects of Persona 3's writing as a whole. Every main character is introduced with their most prominent characteristics front and center. Junpei is your typical best bro that's allergic to being serious or sincere. Mitsuru embodies the idea of a capable and composed wealthy heiress. Akihiko's the cool and sporty older brother with a chip on his shoulder. And Yukari hides her insecurities behind, for lack of a better term, just being a bitchy teenage girl. These characters, existing as platonic ideals of stereotypical tropes, never really diminishes, as much as they're peeled back to reveal the truth that exists within them. Junpei longs to define himself as unique and be recognized on his own merits, and the only way he's been able to do that up to this point in his life is by convincing himself everyone's laughing with him and not at him. Yukari acts standoffish in an attempt to define herself as capable and independent because she loathes the idea of having to rely on others after watching her neglectful mother depend on a carousel of lovers to support them in the aftermath of her father's death. Akihiko developed a misguided but single-minded obsession with physical strength and mental fortitude after being literally unable to save his friend Miki from dying in a fire at their orphanage, and figuratively unable to support his only surviving childhood friend, Shinjiro, from withdrawing into themselves after an accident resulting in the death of an innocent bystander. The writing of every major character, and even the vast majority of the side characters, consistently grants them the allowance to exist as individuals capable of growing past the egocentrism, anxiety, insecurity, guilt, prejudice, and even cruelty they are capable of. But as is the case in reality, rarely ever shows them transcending it completely, thereby highlighting the way in which we as humans must be active participants in our own lives if we truly want to strive to understand the endlessly undulating inner workings of our own human hearts. Over these beginning months, there's hints of larger forces at work. For example, it's revealed that Mitsuru's father's company, the Kirijo Group, which Yukari's deceased father worked for as a scientist, is responsible for the creation of the Dark Hour, and by extension, Tartarus. And if FES is able to defeat all 12 of the New Moon Shadows, they might finally be able to get rid of the Dark Hour for good. A rival group of dangerous Persona users called Strega are introduced while their navigator, Chidori, begins to form a very sweet romance with Junpei. There's even the government-mandated, awful Persona beach vacation segment. But all of these hints at something bigger and small peeks into what motivates the characters fall short, as they're few and far between across the first 50 hours or so of gameplay. For about 6 months of in-game time, I had a lot of trouble gaining the motivation to continue to boot up because the pacing is just so atrociously disjointed, which is definitely not helped by what I mentioned previously regarding the sharp drop in social simulation opportunities when school is out for summer break. Maybe this could have been remedied by not locking starting Yukari, Mitsuru, and Fuka's social links behind maxing out your charm, academics, and courage respectively, even though apart from academics, the social stats aren't all that hard to level, and you can realistically have all three maxed out by the end of summer. I still feel that if the party member social links were accessible earlier in the game, these first few months might not feel so strangely transient and directionless. Many fans defend the pacing by claiming that it works to establish characters, tone, and story in a way that feels organic. But this argument really only has merit if you already know Hashino's sick and twisted October 4th gambit is going to take place. Once Shinjiro joins the party after the September New Moon boss, and FES prepares to fight the final 3 shadows and hopefully be rid of the Dark Hour, it suddenly goes from some nebulous concept of a larger plot to major status quo altering events happening one right after the other. Shortly before Shinjiro joins the party, there's hints of the existence of an unfortunate connection between him and the 10-year-old child and FES' newest member, Ken. Later it's revealed that 2 years prior, Shinjiro lost control of his persona while fighting a shadow that resulted in the death of a bystander who happened to be Ken's mother. Consumed by the guilt and anguish of his part in the death of an innocent person, and in addition to the event rekindling the residual trauma he and Akihiko have been living with since they were unable to save Akihiko's sister during a fire at their orphanage as children, Shinjiro leaves FES shortly afterwards and now lives in solitude among the underbelly of the city and has been taking special drugs to suppress his persona's power, as he feels he's a danger to those around him because of it. When Akihiko tells him Ken has joined the team, Shinjiro agrees to come back to FES, hoping he can protect Ken and somehow take responsibility for what he's done. Mechanically, Shinjiro serves as a powerful utilitarian party member with his passive health regen and strong damage boosting skills. And because of this relative increased strength compared to the other party members at the time, the player is greatly incentivized to use him while progressing through Tartarus that month. This is, as many already know, all part of a dirty trick on the developer's part, because Shinjiro is a temporary party member that becomes completely unavailable to be used to fight the New Moon boss taking place on October 4th, and subsequently the entire rest of the game. Before I get into the plot events that lead to this, I'd like to take some time to talk about the combat in this game, because it's very easily the most interesting in the modern series, and among some of my favorite across all JRPGs I've played. Rather famously, the player only has direct control over what actions the MC takes in combat, which leaves the other 3 members of the party to take their own actions according to their programmed AI. The player can influence the type of actions they take though, which at the start of the game has a limited amount of options, such as telling the individual characters to focus on healing and support, stand by and do nothing, or the default at the start of every battle, simply just act freely as their AI sees fit. As you go through the game and defeat New Moon bosses, additional tactic commands are added, with the most useful among them being focusing on knocking down individual enemies by hitting their weaknesses or using moves with high critical hit chance, and the conserve SP command, where they only attack with their weapons or cast physical skills that consume HP rather than SP. This departure from the standard turn-paced JRPG formula can seem, and at times absolutely is, frustrating and unintuitive. But once you get the hang of how to use and when to rotate tactics to almost entirely guarantee your party does what you want them to the majority of the time, being unable to control exactly what your party does becomes an essential part of not only how tense and fun this battle system can be, but also intrinsically folds into the ways in which the game's writing works to establish characters as individuals, each experiencing life through their own unique perspective, and slowly evolves the party dynamics from that of functions forced to work together to realize a larger goal to a group of people who genuinely trust and care for one another after all they've been through together. This has been spoken on by Hoshino and the developers as the express intention when deciding not to allow full control of the party in battle. This artistic intent extends further to things like party members staying late at school for practice or having a date scheduled on certain days, and therefore not being selectable to take into Tartarus that night, or even having to walk up and speak to them individually to check their stats and change their equipment instead of doing so through the main menu. In an interview with Matt Mullen and Ash Paulson, translated by M. Kyrie Hayashi for the Persona 3 official Design Works art book, Hoshino details why they were so adamant about including these things despite a lot of the pushback they got from higher-ups and playtesters, stating that, "We wanted to emphasize the feeling that they were completely separate beings unifying for a single purpose. You're together in the dungeon, but once you leave, you're alone again. Once you're alone, you are contacted by other people who may not have been in the dungeon with you. We wanted the player to relate to the hero more than any other character in Persona 3, so we wanted other characters to feel like other people." Despite the capacity for these narratively impactful gameplay elements and flourishes to end up being annoying for the player to interface with in practice, after playing the entire game, I've come to believe that not only is the actual tedium of them way overblown, but also that the fundamental inclusion of things that inconvenience the player for the purpose of further elaborating on story through gameplay is something that makes video games such a unique medium for storytelling, and shouldn't be removed or changed if the developer feels they are essential to the experience they want the player to have. That being said, there's more I'd like to talk about in regarding other aspects of Persona 3's combat, so I'll come back to that point later when I discuss the game's final boss. There's several other things about the battle system that arguably had a far greater effect on the combat design's ability to build challenging yet exciting gameplay, starting with the fact that universally across both player character, party member, and enemies, if a combatant is knocked down either by having a weakness targeted, stumbling after an attack is evaded, or suffering a critical hit, they will lose their next turn and be forced to use it to stand back up again. On its own, losing a character's entire turn in any turn-based RPG is pretty bad, but it becomes even worse when you take into account that there is no guard command in Persona 3. That means if the attack isn't dodged, the full damage will be dealt no matter what, and if that attack happens to hit a weakness or critical hits, you can say goodbye to that character's next turn. But being able to deny an opponent their next turn isn't the only strength behind targeting weaknesses or getting critical hits, because doing so also triggers a one more. One More is an adapted version of the press turn system SMT games have been using since Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne for the PlayStation 2, where each side of battle is granted a certain amount of actions in the form of turn icons. Under normal circumstances, one action equals one turn, but by garnering critical hits, targeting opponents' weaknesses, or even strategically choosing to pass to the next party member, the group will gain half-turn icons, which can be used to take additional, smaller actions, or combine to take full actions. One More takes the general concept of manipulating amounts of actions player or enemies can perform, and simplifies it by making it so that the thing that would result in a half-turn icon in the press turn system just grant the combatant that did so an additional action with no strings attached in the One More system. While this can sound like a potentially difficult and punishing battle system due to just how easy it can be for enemies to snowball just one knockdown into looping stun locks and unavoidable damage, the player can easily do the same thing to them. And let me tell you, nothing makes you feel quite as smart as taking advantage of the systems in this game available to you to do so. This ability for both enemy and player to abuse these very punishing mechanics to come out victorious serves to create a very real sense of danger and drama to even the most mundane of random encounters, while also placing increased importance on many aspects of the metagame unique to it. Endurance and agility stats of the party members' personas, as well as the MC's currently equipped persona, become highly impactful when lacking the ability to guard, as higher endurance results in less damage taken on average, and the higher agility stat makes it more likely the attack is dodged entirely, which in turn makes the skills that buff or debuff these stats far more impactful. The elemental affinities of the personas you're fusing in the Velvet Room become innately tied to what skills you're fusing into them, because just having a big fuck-off damaging skill that the Tartarus boss you're fighting is weak to won't do much good if the persona it's attached to's weaknesses mean the boss keeps knocking you down and skipping your turns. The basic attack command becomes invaluable to knock down enemies weak to a certain type of physical damage without using resources, and occasionally helps set up interesting looping stun locks in conjunction with most status effects increasing the likelihood of critical hits. Even turn order, which is not particularly important in other Persona games, becomes so incredibly impactful that Persona 3 is the only game where you can press a button to see the entire turn order as opposed to only who's next in it, because even slight variations in turn order can eliminate strong winning strategies entirely and even inspire new ones to become viable. This all adds up to a combat system that's depth rewards knowledge and awareness, constrictions breed creativity and flexibility, and structure inspires genuine participation from the player no matter if it's the final boss or random Tartarus Shadow number 32. I legitimately had so much fun with Persona 3 FES's combat to the point I think it might be one of, if not the strongest thing the game has going for it. Not only is it incredibly fun once you understand the rules, it continues to be fun throughout the game's entire playtime, precisely because it requires you to never underestimate the enemy. You can and will die to random Tartarus Shadow number 32 off a few bad plays, just as easily as you can to a New Moon boss. And as frustrating as this can be, I never felt it was unfair, because it's a combat system that asks you to pay attention and rewards you for putting in the work to engage with it without holding your hand and forcing you to do so. Playing on normal difficulty, I could always point to a decision I myself made that landed me on the game over screen, and it was quite rare that I felt the reason was pure inability to meet the enemy on their turns. Which isn't to say this game doesn't have some stupid old game cheap shit, but more often than not, the player is allowed to manipulate the same controller chucking crap the enemies can do in their favor as easily as they can fall prey to it. Why can that happen?! Fuck this game! Speaking of cheap shit, October 4th's New Moon boss, Strength and Fortune, boasts one of the funniest cheap strats the game has to offer due to their unique gimmick mechanic, where Fortune brings out a spinning wheel marked with various effects that can benefit the party or the bosses, one of which inflicts the Fear status effect, and it just so happens that a new skill added to Persona 3, Ghastly Wail, instantly kills any combatant currently inflicted with fear. Now, usually it's useless to use status effect skills on bosses in these games because virtually all bosses are resistant to them, but funnily enough, this doesn't apply to Strength and Fortune since they technically inflict themselves with fear through the wheel. So provided the player can press the button at the right timing to stop the wheel at the right place, and if they have already fused a persona with the skill prior, you can just cast Ghastly Wail and instantly win the fight right then and there. After defeating Strength and Fortune, which both Shinjiro and Ken are missing during, the party goes looking for them when Akihiko and Mitsuru realize the significance of the date. Ken has already asked Shinjiro to meet him in the alleyway where his mother's death took place on the same date years prior, and explains that he witnessed his mother's death at Shinjiro's hands there. He goes on to detail the grief and anger he's been drowning in since her death, at one point even contemplating suicide, before resolving to avenge her first. Shinjiro accepts this because despite all his attempts to repress and forget, he knows deep down that dying is the only way to atone, but warns Ken that the overwhelming pain he feels right now will only worsen when coping with the emotional consequences of taking another's life. It's at this point that the leader of Strega, Takaya, appears and begins to taunt them by revealing that the drugs Shinjiro has been taking to suppress his persona have begun to take their toll on his body, and he will soon die from the effects. This sends Ken spiraling as he's lived the last 2 years with only the solace that he would be the one to take his mother's killer's life, only for their death to be inevitable either way. Childishly lamenting that he's lost his reason to live now that he knows Shinjiro will die with or without his involvement, Ken begs for his life to end, which Takaya complies by pulling out a gun and shooting at the child. Shinjiro jumps in front of the bullet to protect Ken, and as he bleeds out, pleads for him to turn all his anger and pain into strength and continue living for both their sakes before collapsing on the concrete, dead.
Come on, kid, you're just a kid. You've got your whole life ahead of you.
so don't waste it. Make it your own, okay?
But
Aki, take care of him.
I will.
This is how it should be.
Shinjiro's death is the first time that the game's broader narrative thesis of the fleeting nature of mortality and the ease in which we can waste the time we have on this earth is presented so overtly. There's allusions here and there up until this point, but due to the previously mentioned pacing issues, the meat of the story's core themes are never as clearly stated as during the events of October 4th and afterwards. One thing I really love about the month leading up to this is that most of the content existing to endear the player to Shinjiro and really solidify his death as a turning point for the story and its characters is entirely optional and easily missable. Later games, including the remake for this one, would provide ways to keep track of the existence of flavor text and non-essential dialogue that has always served as what really makes these games hold significant emotional weight, whether it be through things like adding visual indicators if you've already seen the current unique dialogue when speaking to a character, or forcing participation in certain side content. A lot of these objectively convenient elements just don't exist in Persona 3, and if that's because it's an older game made with a dated game design philosophy, or an intentionally important narrative choice is up for debate, personally, I really love it. You have to choose to engage with each party member in the lounge if you want to know if they have something new to say. And while it can be a nuisance to walk up to every character and read the same dialogue they've said the past 2 days, it's a practice that places the onus of connecting with the characters and experiencing the world that defines them on the player's willingness to engage with it. This elaborates on a thematic message that ties every Hoshino-directed Persona game together. Putting forth the effort to form genuine connections with others, no matter how inconvenient, tedious, or monotonous it may be, is essential to humanity's fundamental desire to always be better than we were previously. This message is most clearly demonstrated quite literally in the social link system, where by spending time with certain characters, the players will gain bonus experience points when fusing personas of that character's associated arcana in the Velvet Room. This bonus XP will increase the stats of the persona immediately upon fusing, as well as the persona's level, which in turn unlocks additional skills at certain levels only otherwise unlocked when gaining XP through using them in battle. Thus, the bonus XP awarded from your current progression through social links is an essential part of becoming stronger and progressing through Tartarus, because XP is only awarded to the currently equipped persona at the end of battle, and the amount is so little that leveling up personas purely through combat proves time-consuming to the point of being unrealistic. In total, there are 22 social links in the game, each representing one of the 24 major arcana in the tarot. And while a select few are automatically ranked up through story progression, the vast majority are entirely optional, even if heavily incentivized. Each social link has 10 ranks, and typically by choosing to spend a time block with a character, you will go through a short scene with them that progresses the overarching, yet mostly self-contained conflicts they experience. And at the end, gain a rank and be awarded an increased amount of bonus XP next time you fuse a persona of that arcana in the Velvet Room. Upon completing all 10 ranks of any given social link, the character will give MC an item important to them and the emotional journey he supported them through that allows the player to fuse the ultimate persona of their arcana, which cannot be fused otherwise. Some high points of these social links include the terminally ill young man, Akanari, who is able to not only express the hopelessness he feels regarding his circumstances, as MC helps him write an allegorical children's book about them, but also accept his own death and enjoy his final days by finally befriending someone who doesn't treat him with diminutive pity, but emphatic understanding. Or the athlete from a rival school, Mamoru, whose complicated home life has caused him to look down on his peers that don't overachieve as he does, but soon after must learn to discard his pride and rely on others' kindness, while MC helps him redefine what he truly wants to prioritize in life. I also really like the late game link belonging to the android party member Aigis, who over the course of it comes to understand that humanity is not defined by the bodies we reside in, but by our ability to feel overwhelming love, resulting in the single craziest romance scene in the entire series. Seriously, MC and Igus's little chibi models making out sloppy style on screen would have been less intimate than what actually happens here. Even some of the more comedic links are written with a fair amount of underlying depth, like the sleazy, two-faced businessman President Tanaka, who literally scams you out of 40,000 yen just to start his link, and then proceeds to give you awful life advice for 10 straight ranks, and still manages to touch on how the traumatic nature of poverty can cause those who live through it to become distrusting of acts of kindness. That being said, the sheer amount of these single character-centric storylines that exist in the game means some will be better executed than others. Therefore, Persona 3's selection of social links is not without faults. Some, like Kenji's, Kazushi's, and Toriumi's, are flat out bad, and force the player to enable the character's self-sabotaging behavior in order to progress, while others, like Fuka or Yuko's, lack any kind of central thesis and just end up feeling like superfluous padding. Something interesting that, while existing to some extent in a few of the other games, but is far more prominent in this one, is the ability to both reverse and break your progression in social links, which has an impact on if you're awarded XP in the Velvet Room, and even can permanently eliminate your ability to fuse personas of the associated arcana altogether. There are a few ways to reverse a social link, with the most standard one being neglecting them by not spending time with the character for 60 days or more. This method of reversing only happened to me once, and doesn't matter that much because fully maxing out every social link in the game is an incredibly difficult feat, and Nishino has even stated that the devs intended for it to be practically impossible. The other two ways to reverse a social link are by answering certain flag dialogue prompts in an extremely rude or dismissive manner, which then break if you continue to choose negative dialogue when attempting to mend the relationship. But the far more annoying method to reverse a link, in my opinion, is that by progressing a social link with a female character past the point where you are forced into a relationship with them, will automatically reverse any other link you are currently going through with any other school-aged female student if you have also reached that point of dating them too. I actually don't mind all that much that the MC is forced to date every school-aged female character that has a social link, but granted, I have an easier time than most separating things I dislike from the larger impact the work had on me. The inherent idea that MC is essentially cheating on every girl with all the others isn't a sticking point for me, because some of the romantic scenes in the later ranks really moved me, and felt thematically important to that character's story as a whole. And it's never brought up anywhere outside of that character's link that you're dating them, so it just really doesn't matter to me. It is weird that Hoshino has spoken on the fact you're forced to date them because of an archaic belief he held at the time of development, that men and women absolutely cannot be friends without their relationship eventually turning romantic. But man, there are really more important things in the world for me to worry about than some Japanese guy in his 30s harboring relatively tame, problematic ideas about men and women's ability to relate to each other genuinely. I just really don't like how this ability to reverse social links so easily by trying to spread out your progress in them makes it so that you basically have to focus solely on completing one female character's link at a time, so as to not have to waste the time blocks mending your relationship with others. It's a mechanic that adds virtually nothing to the game, and is one of the very few of its type that introduces inconvenience without any narrative purpose in return. On the other end, I do really like the little touch that once a link is reversed through any means, the character must be found in a different location in the school than where they usually stand to initiate the conversation to fix it, which, while a relatively small thing, adds a greater sense of independence and personality to their existence as characters. Meanwhile, I didn't break any social links in my playthrough, as it's relatively difficult since the options to do so are so obviously something no one who's upset with you would ever want to hear. But I like the fact it exists as a way to place importance on the narrative message of treating those around you with respect and empathy, even if you believe the reasons for being upset are irrational. All in all, social links have always been a huge selling point of these games, and for good reason, as the vast majority of them are written with an infectious earnestness that highlights what precious little amounts of love, beauty, strength, and genuine kindness exist within the mundanity of modern life. It would have been exceedingly easy for these piecemeal windows into the lives of everyday people dealing with complex emotional struggles that populate the game's social sim sections, and for the most part are entirely disconnected from the mythos and action of the main story, to feel like distractions from it instead of essential to not only communicating the larger narrative themes, but to finding the fundamental experience of playing Persona 3 as one that inspires the player to reflect on their relationships and put forth the effort to connect with those around them as they were able to do with the characters in the game. it's not hard to say that even the very best video game soundtracks exist as a function. What we remember as the hardest final boss theme we've ever heard, or a wistful sad backstory ballad that still makes us tear up when it pops up on shuffle, are only as memorable as the gameplay moments that they play during. Despite how technically well composed or performed a video game soundtrack may be, they very rarely would hold such strong emotional attachment for us if they weren't fundamentally tied to a holistic experience we enjoyed and think fondly of. This is all a generous way to say that most video game music is good because of the game it was written for, and typically becomes something special when removed from that context. So that's why I truly and genuinely mean it when I say Persona 3 OST is fucking good. Composition-wise, Persona 3's music is consistently sure of how it incorporates the elements that set it apart, without sacrificing what video game soundtracks are supposed to do. It can be so steeped in a groovy hip-hop fusion sound that you just want to get up and dance to, like with the radio single-worthy battle theme, Mass Destruction, while also being wholly capable of delivering delicate, emotional ballads, like with the melancholic piano among swelling strings of Living with Determination. What makes the stark difference in mood and tone work, though, is the way in which the composition uses persistent melodies and motifs that work to build upon the feelings that have been imparted upon the player as the game's narrative progresses, all while making sure to iterate and elaborate on them in interesting ways. Things like Tartarus having essentially one track that new elements are added to every time you move to a new block, until it becomes a fully realized performance in the final stretch. The use of the melody established in the song that plays as the player enters their chosen name for the main character at the very start of the game, that continues to reappear among entirely new musical contexts time and time again throughout the entire run. And even the hard rock final boss theme, Battle for Everyone's Souls, prominently featuring the iconic operatic chorus to Aria of the Soul, which has served as the theme for the Velvet Room since Persona 1. These all work to form compelling bridges between the outstanding vocal tracks that the game is most well known for, while standing on their own as Hollywood-worthy soundtrack pieces. While there are clear standouts, especially among the aforementioned vocal tracks, the entire soundtrack is not only consistently good while reaching some of the greatest heights the series has to offer, but also folds into the way it defines the game's strength as a whole. There's a clear intention for the soundtrack to characterize itself as unique that's reminiscent of the Dreamcast era of games like Jet Set Radio and Space Channel 5. And much like those games, this memorable departure from the typical brassy chiptunes and orchestral rhapsodies that make up most video game OSTs flawlessly immerses you in what I think is all modern Persona games' greatest strength: the earnest act of existing and interfacing with what makes up the in-game world around you. I won't get too much into this concept right now, as it's something I intend to touch on throughout my discussion of all three games, since, as I said, I think it's what truly makes these games as special as they are. Nonetheless, it's something that really solidifies not only this entry, but every other one going forward as something worthy of ascending past its faults to become exponentially greater than the sum of its parts. It's revealed in early December that in a battle with a powerful shadow of the Death Arcana a decade before, Aigis realized she couldn't outright beat it and was forced to seal it away within the soul of an orphan child standing nearby, which ended up being the MC. This is where Pharos, the strange boy in the pajamas who has been visiting MC in his dreams throughout the game, came from, and by defeating the 12 New Moon bosses was untethered from MC's soul, and now appears as the flirtatious and carefree recent foreign transfer student, Ryoji Mochizuki. After regaining the memories of his origin, Ryoji explains to Seize that him being freed is an omen of the coming of Nyx and the subsequent apocalyptic event she will enact upon arriving, the Fall. There's absolutely nothing they can do to stop this from happening, but if they kill him, it will erase their knowledge of the Dark Hour and everything pertaining to it, so they can forgo the dread and anxiety of their impending doom until it comes on January 31st. He offers his life gladly, since the friendship he's formed with MC as Pharos leaves him with deep sorrow and regret over his part in Nyx's coming, and so he gives them until the new year, December 31st, to make their decision regarding his life. Over the course of the month, all of Seize resolves, for their own reasons, that they don't want to forget everything they've been through together or attempt to run from their deaths. MC is still given the chance to choose to kill Ryoji when the time comes. But to unlock the final month of gameplay, the final boss, and the true ending, the player must spare Ryoji and choose to not only value the beauty inherent within the act of living, but believe in this resolve while facing death itself. Despite Ryoji's insistence that the events of the Fall and therefore the end of the world being inevitable, and there's absolutely nothing they can do in the face of the overwhelming power of a god, Every member of SEES again resolves to face Nyx and put forth their best effort to fight her and protect what is precious to them. Thus, on the day of Nyx's arrival, SEES meets her on the roof of Tartarus, and beneath the light of the last full moon they might ever see, pull the trigger one final time. Nyx as a boss is a very clear example of what I'm talking about when I say that this game's story and gameplay are difficult to discuss independent of each other. Persona 3's final boss makes stunning use of art direction, thematics, and mechanics to deliver a true test of endurance and a grueling tug-of-war between player and boss that can, at times, feel as insurmountable as fighting a god would in reality. Without serious optimization or being majorly over-leveled for her, Nyx can take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half to complete, and this is because this boss has a total of 13 phases, each representing one of the arcana assigned to the 12 new moon bosses we fought throughout the game. These phases all boast vastly different skill sets and elemental resistances, with the only thing tying them together being Nyx's unique 2 actions per turn and her trademark boss skill Almighty Attack, which inflicts heavy almighty damage on the entire party. Each phase has 1500 health points, so it's not all that hard to make use of skills that double the next attack for the MC like Mind Charge and Power Charge, in conjunction with the buff and debuff skills most party members have at least one of, to blow through the 12 phases and make it to Nyx's true arcana, Death. And that's good, because death is where this boss begins to start to really wear on the player. Nyx's final form boasts 4 times the health as every other phase, with an added 0.5 times damage modifier across the board, effectively halving damage taken. She also boasts the highest damage potential of all the phases, with access to things like Mind Charge Megidolon, as well as a move called Moonless Gown that seemingly just exists to waste your goddamn time and drag out an already exhaustingly long fight. Alone, the death phase of Nyx is a boss worthy of the final confrontation, and even the 12 phases that come before it, with some minor tweaks, could feasibly serve as a clever thematic inclusion to the game's narrative. But put them together and every attempt at Nyx, which just due to the nature of her design, the average first-time player will have to do multiple times, feels less like a worthy challenge at the end of a long journey, and more like a shambling march towards your own demise. Which is both infuriating and kind of awesome, because if I recall, other final bosses in the series have taken somewhere around the same amount of time for me to complete, but I was always willing to try again at least once after a game over. A game over in the final phase of Nyx meant I wasn't touching the game for the rest of the day, at the very minimum. There's just such an overwhelming consternation to the way this boss is structured that no amount of additional grinding to level up your party or optimizing fusions in the Velvet Room can rid it of. And that's really the beauty of, and also the problem with, how Persona 3 chooses to intersect its story and gameplay. Because as effective as this dreadful marathon against the Greek goddess of the night is to get across the overarching message that even though the gift of life is defined by the inevitability of its end, we cannot use this as an excuse to waste the time we are given, it also kind of sucks to actually play. Which really brings us back to the age-old debate of if we really want video games to be considered a medium fully capable of storytelling with the capacity for artistic merit, just as film, prose, television, and music are, do they still have to be fundamentally enjoyable to play? At its core, it's a tough debate, no matter which way you lean. Video games are considerably more expensive to even gain initial access to consuming than most other artistic mediums, especially in this day and age where new releases are getting dangerously close to breaking the $100 price point threshold. Far more than a ticket to an award-winning movie or the $15 for a copy of the most recent Pulitzer Prize-nominated novel. Not to mention, they're also a substantially greater time and energy investment because while games vastly differ in how long they take to complete, a JRPG release on the scale of a modern Persona game can't take upwards of 100 hours to complete, which isn't even accounting for if you want to see everything the game has to offer, where it can easily balloon far past that. Even then, as a relatively young medium, born from the intention to occupy children's attention, video games have always struggled to define themselves past that moniker in the broader public consciousness, which the current game industry isn't really doing much to counter, as predatory free-to-play, pay-to-win release models run rampant, award shows that would serve to highlight and celebrate the best of the best in other mediums continue to exist as little more than glorified sizzle reels for upcoming releases, and publishers and developers themselves consistently abandon the artistic convictions of their work to bend to the entitlement of fan backlash. All this comes together to force any creative aspiring to craft evocative stories within this incredibly unique interactive medium to have to constantly fight to realize their stories among an industry that almost seems to exist to diminish the artistic merit of the very content they make in service of ever-increasing profits, while also contending with the overwhelming expectations of a frictionless experience from the very people who buy and play their games. I don't want to get too much into my disagreements with the way the Persona 3 FES full remake, Persona 3 Reload, chose to change and remove a lot of the very things I think make FES such an enjoyable experience. But I made an offhanded tweet a while back that I think touches on what exactly bothers me about the direction Reload chose to take when reimagining FES. Reload is better than FES if you only play video games after 12-hour shifts at Amazon, I guess. What I mean by this is video games are art, and like every other medium of artistic expression, they contain infinite potential for purpose. You don't buy a ticket to a Marvel movie expecting an Oscar-worthy cinema experience. You don't start reading Ulysses by James Joyce when you're looking for the lighthearted charm of a slice-of-life romance. And you especially don't listen to the newest Taylor Swift album, desiring the same experience of attending a classical symphony. The purpose with which a piece of art is made matters. The intentions of the artist matter. Exactly what the creator of any piece of art wants to express holds weight, because as artists and storytellers, our only hope when putting the things we make out into the world is that the experience others come away with are as close to the intended expression as possible. And frankly, more often than not, if consumption of a work is met with friction, that's a good sign that the execution was even the tiniest bit successful. It's easy to see while writing out all my thoughts on this game that it has a lot of problems. Incredibly slow to start and lacking much focus when it actually does. All the little problems surrounding Tartarus, fragmented and somewhat stilted storytelling along with arbitrary, outdated mechanical limitations, long periods of monotonous inactivity, and the list goes on. This game didn't open my eyes to a new lease on life. It didn't broaden my worldview or challenge my existing ideas of the meaning of life and the importance of connecting with others, but it never had to do any of that. When I step back and think about the absolute joy I experienced from this game once I was finally hooked, the way I would walk away from most play sessions fulfilled but excited to continue next time, the intense feeling of warmth and genuine happiness that overcame me when a character thanked me for supporting them or finally understood what it means to live for themselves, the earnest and almost indescribable sense of comfort I felt while simply just existing in the game. Those are the parts of playing Persona 3 FES that matter to me. I love everything about Persona 3. I love how I felt playing it. I love how I feel when I think about my time with it. I love this game not in spite of its flaws, but because it's able to rise ever past them, and in the process fully embraces the uniqueness of the medium it's made in to communicate its thesis in one of the most concise and effective manners, not just in gaming, but across any piece of storytelling with artistic intent. And in the end, I think that's what defines Persona 3's legacy. The game's ability to elaborate on its central thesis in the countless diegetic yet easily digestible ways never feels like it's banging you over the head with what it's about, which is impressive because objectively, it kind of feels like it is. This results in being the easiest to understand of the modern Persona games, which isn't a bad thing, as that's completely by design. Persona 3 FES is not a game that is meant to be experienced without contention, and that's exactly what makes it great. Everything in the story that serves to stand in the character's way does the same for the player, and the intimate understanding between the player and the story this creates is why so many people hold this game so dear. So whether our lives end far off in the future or a week from now, let's all do our best to live by the message Persona 3 imparted on us. We cannot let our fundamental fear of death force us to live disconnected from each other. Because when the time comes to rest your weary head on another's lap and close your eyes for the very last time, the only thing that will matter in this world is that you gave every last drop of love in your body to those who did the same in return.